Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this final virtual governance webinar of the year. It's very heartening to have so many of you taking the time to find out more about integrated curriculum financial planning at the end of what has been a long and challenging term. In fact, let's be honest, it's been a long and challenging year. For those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Paul Aber, Head of Training Development at the NGA. I should probably make clear at the start that I'm not an expert ICFP practitioner, and as we'll see later, ICFP expertise does need to reside in the school staff team, and those governing do not need to be expert practitioners. But ICFP is something I've always been interested in, and I can well understand why governors and trustees would want to know more about it and how it can be used. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. There won't be time for me to deal with questions during the webinar. It's only 30 minutes. So there's no need for you to press the mute button or do anything like that. It will already be preset. If you do have a question, then please submit it by the chat function. We'll have a look at the questions asked and feedback to everyone by email, although this probably won't be until the new year. What we'll aim to do is we'll aim to answer specific questions, but where we have more than one question on the same theme, then we'll combine the answer. So this webinar is being recorded and will be available to members afterwards by the website, the NGA website. Just a sort of functional point. If you want to make the picture of me smaller and the PowerPoint bigger, then I think you can do this using your controls. That's entirely up to you. And lastly, there will be a couple of simple polls, so please do join in answering these. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so here's what we're going to look at today in this webinar. It's meant to be an introduction, but as you may be aware, NGA has been looking at ICFP over the last year or so and has recently published a new guidance paper for members called Integrated Curriculum and Financial Planning, a guide for governing boards, and a new Learning Link module is due to be published tomorrow. So whilst I may tread a bit on the toes of some of those new bits of guidance, what I'm not going to do is give the game away and just repeat what's in them, but instead what I'd like is for this webinar to whet your appetites about ICFP if they weren't already whetted. So I won't be working through all the stages of the ICP process, and I won't be explaining all of the metrics and the ratios used. So I'm sorry if anybody wanted me to do that, but there just isn't time. So let's have a look at the first poll. Andy, if you'd please launch the first poll. I'm just allowing 15 seconds for this. It's not a very complicated poll. So Andy, if you could launch the poll, please.
Just say when you want to close it.
Okay, let's close the poll now. Okay, so I can see, just feeding back on the poll, I can see that most people want to know how ICFP can help their school trust. I've got 32% have said they've heard of ICFP, but they don't know what it is. 31% have said they think they know what ICFP is, but they want to know more. 14% said they know what ICFP is, but want to find out more. And 9% said, I want to know if their school or trust is required to use ICFP. So that's very useful. Thank you very much. It sounds like I'm hoping that this webinar will give something for everybody. Okay, moving on, just a little bit about about terminology first. There are similar but different names for ICFP, but they all mean the same thing. It's also sometimes referred to as optimization. So for the purposes of this webinar and to avoid and to save my tongue twisting, I'm going to use ICFP throughout the webinar. Can I also flag up that ICFP does use terminology, essentially acronyms and abbreviations like PTR, ATC, that aren't in normal everyday governance usage. So if I do use a term, I will make sure to say what it means. But you really don't need to worry about this. If you work with ICFP, and even if you don't, you'll soon get the hang of it and the terminology. Just one more point in terms of other terminology, I'll be referring to schools and trusts. Sometimes I refer to just schools. When I am doing that, I'm also including trusts too. So. Okay, so before we look at the current context, what I'd like to do is just to share a couple of stories with you about ICFP. The first is when I first became interested in ICFP. So it's about 4 years ago, I was involved with delivering the governance element of some professional development for CEOs. And one of the sessions about school improvement was led by someone you may have heard of called Sir Michael Wilkin, who he was the chair. He was the CEO of his multi-academy trust. He was invited to share with fellow CEOs how his MAT used ICFP and how it helped the trust to quantify and allocate school improvement support across the trust. I think it's fair to say that many CEOs in the room were attracted by the approach, and as was I. And I really mention it to explain how I became interested in it, but also to say that it's one ICFP approach that has been highlighted by the DFE, and to show that ICFP methodology is also shared by different organisations. And I think I seem to remember that when we were at the end of the session, we were all given a memory stick with the spreadsheets, with the ICFP spreadsheets on them as a bit of a souvenir. But that was 4 years ago, and as we'll see later, things have moved on quite a lot, which leads me to my second story. Last week, I got a call from a trustee who was inquiring about a new workshop that we've developed that looks at how schools can generate income and the board's role in this. So as part of the scoping process, I always like to find out what exactly is the support that the person needs and the school needs, because sometimes they come along with apples and really actually what they need is pears. So it sort of quickly became clear that the board was already trying to take a strategic approach to its finance and was generating income and had set up a committee to focus on it, but needed some more support to develop their initial work. So when I asked why the school needed to generate income, it quickly became clear that the real issue lay in the fact that the board was not confident that the curriculum was affordable, or that the school had a long-term plan to finance it. I asked if the school used ICFP, and I was asked to explain by the trustee what ICFP was, and when I did, I was asked what could the school do to start using it. So the point really is that ICFP has been around for some time, but there are many people, many schools, many boards who are still unaware of it, or possibly unaware that their school or trust is using it even. So let's just have a look at the context. I suppose ICFP, the first thing to say is ICFP is not really a new concept. And all trusts and schools are likely to be using it to a greater or lesser extent in some form already. I would hesitate to say that it's become all the rage, but over the last few years, it does seem to have gained more limelight and traction. And so I'll come on to this in a minute and what it means. But first of all, I just wanted to take a moment to look at what governors and trustees see as their main challenges and why I think this is relevant for CFP, or why ICFP is relevant for those challenges. First, a few words about COVID. we've all got our stories about COVID and how it's impacted on the school and school budgets. And you can see on the slide that these are the sort of common problems that schools are facing and will continue to face. I mean, there's obviously been some government funding for additional premises costs, and latterly government promises for staff absence funding once reserves have been used. But the reality is that many schools are struggling financially. And to help demonstrate how important it is to have a system in place which can model solutions, I just wanted to mention a few examples I've heard of how coronavirus is affecting staffing and budgets with potential implications for curriculum delivery. So yesterday I heard about a school in the Northeast whose building just can't accommodate the class bubbles it needs to. It's an old building, and so the school has had to buy 2.5 more staff to manage the situation. Obviously, that's a significant cost. Then again, last week, I was talking to a governor from a special school who said that their PPE costs are so high, they've had to look at reducing the staff team to cover the shortfall. A few weeks ago, someone told me how the sanitizer costs of one of their secondaries in their trust were nearly £1,000 per week. And I've had several conversations, last of all, with people who've told me how their schools and trusts are suffering because they haven't been able to rely on self-generated income. And this has hit some schools really hard and will continue to do so. Now, ICFP won't find solutions to these things, by itself, but in extreme cases, it can help model the best solutions and the best options, and ensure that the board and senior leaders are able to make informed decisions as to how they can continue to deliver the best curriculum possible in the circumstances. One approach used by some with ICFP, and this may be used by others too, is just to use a contingency fund as a standard element of the budget to recognise that there'll be unforeseen expenditure. And so rather than move the budget around at a later stage when the contingency occurs, they've already got it in a fund, and so a lot less work and a lot less trouble is caused. So, as I say, I'm not saying that the ICFP is a silver bullet for these things, but it certainly it's useful, and it means that it can be reviewed depending on what the circumstances of the school are. Okay, so the current concerns of those governing. So whilst COVID and its consequences have become a recent, I suppose, a recent problem, our recent survey of members in the NGA once again showed that finance and balancing the budget and ensuring a broad and balanced curriculum remain amongst the top concerns. I think they've been in the top 3, and the finance has been the top for some time. So it doesn't come as a surprise, but it does show how well governors and trustees are realistic about the challenges to delivering the necessary quality of education. And what I found interesting is that the sort of these issues also correspond, if you like, to the 2 committee structure that a lot of boards use. And the reason I wanted to pull this, just to identify this, was to say that it's really to draw attention to the fact that a lot of schools, a lot of trusts have separate finance curriculum standards boards, committees, and these then feed into the governing board, but operate separately. So curriculum or resources so curriculum will look at improving standards via a suitable curriculum, whilst finance will look at resources, budget, and setting and reviews. So whilst obviously boards do work to ensure there's liaison and communication between the 2 committees through reporting at the full governing board meetings and in other ways, it isn't difficult to see how there is a potential disconnect between the 2 areas on the 2 committees, or actually put differently, that there may be advantages to be had by them working together to make sure that curriculum plans are affordable and that finance and staffing plans properly consider how to ensure delivery of the curriculum and the best curriculum that might be available. Now, this is a bit oversimplified, and I don't want to make too much of it, but if a coordinated or integrated approach can be taken, then it seems relatively obvious that this could pay dividends for the curriculum and for the budget. So, some change in expectations. So there has been a change in expectations and rise of ICFP. So back in 2018, just a little bit of history, you probably all remember that the DfE published a top 10 planning steps checklist for governors. A number of these of importance when considering staff deployment. In particular, the checklist asks governors to consider the pupil-teacher ratio, how many pupils there are to each teacher in the school, and how this varies across different key stages, class sizes, contact ratio, that's the percentage of the teacher's time spent teaching, and then also average cost per teacher, so how much does each teacher cost, the average cost of each teacher in the school or the trust, and last, the leadership costs expressed as a percentage of the overall costs. Now, we all know schools are able to benchmark themselves against other schools on the first two of these measures, and the contact ratio here, a figure of 0.78 has been suggested by our school some time ago, which represents the non-teaching time is 10% on planning and preparation, 10% on management activity, and a 2% margin. But the accepted range would probably seem to be somewhere in the region of 0.78 to 0.8. It's also worth mentioning that the checklist, as I say, picks out these ratios here and these other two ratios, and really the checklist was launched in a way which suggested that there was more focus on the metrics that schools can use. So benchmarking is useful. It tells the school how it compares with other schools operating in similar circumstances, and it enables school leaders and governors to start asking the right questions. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't provide a solution or process to planning the educational offer. So, and again, thinking historically here, one solution championed by Multi-Academy Trust particularly, and Lord Agnew, who I think seem to remember called it the bedrock of sustainable growth and was a clear advocate for its use, was ICFP. And so over the last 2 years, ICFP has become more established with more schools, more trusts and organizations using it, embracing it as expectations of change. So as many of you will have noticed, the checklists in the school's financial value statement, the SFVS, and the trust equivalent, the school resource management self-assessment tool, now contain the same question. Is the financial strategy integrated with the school's trust strategy for raising standards and attainment? There you are, there's the integration of the two. So what does it mean? I mean, just drilling down a little bit here. Well, if you drill down just so that you do to understand what is intended by that, it's pretty clear. The gov.uk checklist guidance goes on to make it very clear that what is meant by this new checklist question is that is integration achieved through curriculum-led financial planning. Very, very clear. And that means, is there a clear and demonstrable link between the education or curriculum the school wants to deliver and how affordable is it? So the expectation is that the school's budget must support the governing board's priorities for raising standards and attainment, and that this can be done by using and looking at core metrics. And we've already touched on this: average class size, teacher contact ratio, pupil to teacher ratio, percentage of spend on teachers, all sorts of different metrics. And the more metrics, actually, the better, because the better you can triangulate your findings. So that means that using those metrics, the school can be confident that its schools are making the best use of their teaching and support staff and can focus their time on activities that directly improve people's outcomes. That's the thinking behind it, as I'm sure a lot of you will know. So just again, in addition to that, it also means, and this is it, why is it important? There is a clear and demonstrable link between the school's budget and the plan for raising standards attainment. So what is the reason for it? And that's because the school's main function is to ensure that its pupils achieve their full potential and are prepared for adult life. So that's all about continually raising standards and improving attainment. The budget needs to support this, and to do this effectively requires strategic spending decisions and getting value for money and integrating planning for the program of learning, what the school wants to teach, and the teaching resources needed to deliver this alongside the financial planning is the most effective way of achieving this. So this sort of process enables the school to weigh up whether it has enough funds to pay for the proposed learning plan or curriculum or needs to make changes. So if we're in any doubt as to what the checklist guidance means, then it's made clear by this question and answer. If the school does not currently practice integrated curriculum financial planning, you need to introduce it. And this, of course, is also made clear in the new governance handbook, which makes integrated curriculum-led financial planning, ICFP, of crucial importance. So that's the history. That's the history of ICFP, if you like, and how we've got to where we are. But it's probably fair to say that since it came onto the governance horizon, there has been some lack of clarity as to what it is and how it could be used, which has made it difficult for governors and for trustees and for school leaders. So I'm just spending a little time just trying to clarify what ICFP is. You've probably already got a pretty good idea of it from before this session, but hopefully what I've been talking about. Let's just spend a little time looking at what ICFP is. So the idea is to have a process that can run alongside the 3 to 5 year vision, strategy, and budget forecast to allow leaders and governors and trustees to plan effectively rather than just looking at what happened the year before. I mean, that's an oversimplification, but that's the purpose of it. So it's designed to stimulate informed discussion between financial and curriculum decision makers within a school or trust and give them a deeper understanding of where there's pressure, where there's financial challenge or deviance, where expenditure is benchmarked elsewhere. And of course, that is something which most schools and trusts are doing. Most importantly, it's a methodology, so it applies across a single school or a group of schools and to all phases. Metrics and ratios will vary across phases, but the methodology remains the same. It isn't, and it can't be a magic wand, but it can have a major impact and get the right people talking in an informed and structured way about how to deliver the best educational offer for the school in an affordable way. It's also, I suppose, it's a different way of looking at things. I mean, it's common for pressures caused by, say, by teacher pay, which is obviously the biggest element of a school budget, to be based on the assumption that staffing structures would remain consistent from year to year. This would mean, for example, that if a newly qualified science teacher were to leave you, you would replace with another newly qualified science teacher, rather than asking whether or not a different appointment would be better, perhaps an experienced maths teacher, which might be more of a priority. So, whilst it's clear there are different approaches to ICFP, they are all asking a different and simple question with ICFP, which is, what staffing do we need to deliver the curriculum that we want to deliver? And some and different organizations have a different approach to this. Some will also add in that it's all about staffing and the other resources that need to be considered. And they do so more explicitly. So that recognizes obviously that whilst teaching may be the highest cost, a school can only work well with other staff and suitable resources in place. So it's just picking up that in fact what needs to happen is there needs to be balance. Okay, so let's just have a look. We've looked now, we've looked a little bit at, tried to demystify ICFP. We've given the history of ICFP. So what about ICFP in action? Okay, so let's have a look. First of all, let's have a quick look at the 6-step approach which the NGA includes in its guidance. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but and it's also important just to point out that this is not the only approach, but really you need to view it as a broad outline which can be adapted to circumstances of different schools or trusts, but it does look ahead over a period of 3 to 5 years. So most of the work through this process will be done certainly in relation to steps 3 and 4 will be done by the school staff team, so be reassured on that. But the governing board does need to be involved, but in the right way. And the NGA recommends in its guidance setting up a working group, a steering group, to include members of the finance committee, a member of the curriculum committee, the standards committee, and the head or CEO, school trust business lead, and other relevant key school staff involved in curriculum planning and timetabling. So there needs to be a bit of a team working on this. And as I say, it's about getting the right people to discuss and explore ways of creating the right curriculum. Steps 1 and 2, I think, will be familiar to everyone. Step 1 is all about the governing board working with the senior leadership team, working out what it wants for its pupils and setting a 3 to 5 year vision. Step 2 is all about designing a broad and balanced curriculum to achieve the vision, and this will be led obviously by the school leaders and their curriculum leads with input from the board. Steps 3 and 4 are really, in ICFP terms, where I suppose the rubber hits the road. And a lot of the hard work is done using metrics, data, etc. So you will be pleased to know that school business leaders and educational leaders carry most of the load in this area, with the governing board involved when they're needed to be consulted with. And the way it works is at the stages 3 and 4 is that first stage 3, they have to select the metrics relevant to the school or trust and its spending on all relevant areas. And we've already seen the sorts of metrics that that schools and trusts will be looking at. Teacher contract ratio, that's the TCR, pupil teacher ratio, PTR, the average class size, average teacher cost, percentage of total expenditure. So a whole load of metrics you'd want to use. And for the metrics to work, the information that's used to develop those metrics has to be accurate, has to be reliable. Otherwise, it really will be a case of rubbish in and rubbish out. But that is the responsibility of the school staff and the senior leadership team. So once the metrics have been analysed using benchmarking to reconcile, what they're looking to do is to reconcile the resources that are required for the desired curriculum of the school or trust with the curriculum that it can actually afford. And this is critical. So the aim is to reach a plan that directs resources to where they will have the biggest impact on pupil outcomes, and it's financially viable and meets the needs of a future cohort of pupils. So that's what it's all. It's about reconciling the resources that you need with the curriculum. Sorry, recognizing the resources required for the desired curriculum with the curriculum it can actually afford. And obviously that process is one which will take a considerable discussion, looking at options and modelling. The last two steps, 5 and 6, involve the implementation of the plan, so the approval of the plan, and looking at the options, making decisions on options as presented to the board. And then finally, the integrated plan will be the integrated plan will be implemented and needs to be monitored by the senior leadership team and by the board. So that's a very quick run through of the 6 steps. And as I say, it's an outline, different. It's meant to be an outline and nothing more. There is more detail in the guidance. So the challenge is to look at, it's all about balance really. You've got to look at all the elements that are part of the budget and try to get an effective and efficient balance of resource in all areas. This diagram oversimplifies the balancing act and the elements being balanced, but it'll give an idea just about this need for balance. It's not just about staffing, you've also got to get the rest of your resourcing right. So here are some of the metrics and ratios we've already mentioned, and the idea is that, I say, just stay with the idea of balance. That the ICFP process will balance the relationships between these different metrics and these different ratios. By analysing them, the school and the trust can see where it can create savings to invest in areas that will make the greatest difference to pupils. So it's sort of a holistic look at the resources and where they can be best spent and allocated to create a strong curriculum and deliver a strong curriculum. In fact, you can do a simple analysis just using the SFVS and the trust equivalent. It may be that that's what you already do, but there is a simple, you can do that simply. Whichever way you do it, whether you're doing a simple analysis or you're doing a complicated analysis using ICFP, then it will give you the number of teachers you can afford, your trust and school can afford, based on the estimated cost pressures, the income and pupil roll numbers, and the number of teachers you need to deliver the ideal curriculum. If these numbers are different, so if the number the number of teachers you can afford are different to the number of teachers you need to deliver your ideal curriculum, then you have to reconcile them, as I said before. And the reconciliation is going to be done by changing other metrics to close the gap between the numbers. So you can see now why there needs to be a fairly you need to be using spreadsheets and databases to make sure that you can play around with these things to come up with the right solution. It could, for example, mean adjusting class sizes, pupil to teacher ratios, or the number of teachers, or other things, including the profile of staff, of the staff team. And what you change will depend on the priorities set out in the educational vision statement. It's advisable that reconciliation should be done openly with relevant staff until you get to an agreed solution, or, which can then be presented to the board. Obviously, and I mentioned it at the start in terms of concerns, you also, through this process, it's not just about metrics, you need to think about what can be delivered by school staff and the impact of changes, what the impact of any changes may have on teacher workload and the work-life balance of staff. That's obviously a big factor as part of this process. So here's a simple example of how to work out how many teachers are needed. This is really intended to be a very, very simple example, just to show you how metrics can work together. So it's a simple calculation. It shows how some of the DfE's key measures can be brought together. So you've got class sizes, teaching contract ratio, and what you do is you take the total number of pupils and divide by the class size to give you the number of sessions you need to offer to deliver your curriculum. So you then divide that by by the teacher contact ratio, which then shows you the total number of teachers, the FTE of teachers that are required. So in this case, Elder Secondary, you can see Elder has 1,500 pupils. If the desired class size is going to be 20, then you're going to need 75 sessions. And if the teaching contract ratio is 0.78, remember we looked at this before, then you're going to need 96 teachers. Now, that's all very well, but the question is, can that be afforded? And the question is that affordable? And obviously that's the point at which ICFP can be used to help determine if and how the curriculum plans can be met in a way which is balanced and stays within budget. Obviously in practice, the calculations do become more complicated as you start to take decisions to tailor the approach of your curriculum needs. So this could include allowing different year groups or different subjects or different schools within a trust to have different class sizes. So for example, you may have larger classes in year 7 than year 11, or smaller classes in music than in English, or you may want to have smaller classes in a school which is underperforming and has a different pupil profile. So as I say, this is a simple example of the sort of ratios, that sort of metrics that are going to need to be balanced and investigated. Just moving on to a slightly different sort of analysis. Pogston Primary. This is again another simplified example of how metrics can be used to quantify issues to inform the development of an integrated spending plan. This may look a bit daunting. It contains metrics, acronyms, numbers, but don't worry. I'm only going to do a couple of the lines, the couple of the metrics, to give you an idea as to how this element of the stage of the process can work. As I say, I won't do them all. When I circulate when the PDF is circulated, you will be able to look at them all and see how it works. But for now, and please don't write down what the acronyms mean. You really don't need to do that. I'm only giving them here as a flavor of the sort of terminology used in ICFP and what to expect. So let's start with the PTR. That's the pupil-teacher ratio. You can see that the value for Pogston is 20.6, which is significantly below the 20 to 24 range, the norm. Now, what this obviously may be an issue, as it indicates that there may be 2.9 FTE worth of teachers teaching time too many. And therefore, one of the things that would need to happen would be for this to be analysed and reviewed. It's not just a question of saying that's it, but that's obviously a line of inquiry that you can use ICFP to look at to see what's going on. The total teaching staff costs, you can see, 53.3% are higher than the benchmark. So and it's considerably higher than the benchmark, again, which suggests that Pogston may have too many teachers. And again, this would need to be explored. Now, the TTC and the PTR are interconnected, and so you can see that there are two possible lines of inquiry here, as are suggested. There may be others too, but this would prompt the team, particularly the staff team, working on this to see if in fact there were options to deal with the inefficiency, to help deliver the curriculum that Pogston wants to deliver, or to improve Pogston's curriculum. So if it is struggling to deliver a curriculum it wants within a budget, then this information could be very, very useful. And as I say, remember, a lot of this work, most of this work, is going to be done by school leaders with consultation with the governing board from time to time. The point of this example is to show what using metrics and benchmarking can do and how important they are to the process. Okay, let me just show. So these are the other metrics with suggestions as to what the issues may be and what the options may be in terms of investigation. So clearly you can see that ICFP does need to be rigorous, it does need to be properly done, and this will involve investment of time and effort. So why do it? And I'm sort of hoping that by now you can see why ICFP can be such a useful and tool. You know, you say you've probably already worked out what the benefits are, but and there are lots of different things you could talk about, but I've tried here on this slide just to sum up what the benefits are and you know, what might be the key reasons for using ICFP. So being able to deliver the best curriculum that you can afford, resourced properly in all respects, with reasonable staff workloads, is likely to deliver sustainable education success. ICFP will enable the school, your school or trust, or the, you know, to know if it can deliver the curriculum it wants, or as close to the curriculum as it wants as possible over the 3 to 5 year period. It can't. Obviously, the ICFP can't automatically solve a deficit budget problem by itself, but it will give the governing boards and school leaders a process to help try to do this in an informed way, providing the right decisions are made. So it won't automatically cure a deficit budget, but it will, you know, it's a process that can help whilst at the same time preserving the quality of the curriculum. So I hope you've got a clearer picture of what ICFP is and what it can do. But what about ICFP? I mean, in your own setting, and I could see from the questions at the first poll that obviously people know about ICFP. They probably may know their school is using ICFP, but they want to know a little bit more about it. So let's just have a look at this. Is your school using ICFP or not? So if it is, or if you think it is, and you want to find out more about it, and if it's being used effectively, then I would suggest that you have a word with the chair or the chair of your finance or curriculum committees, whoever's leading on it or maybe leading on it, who should be able to tell you more about how it's working in your school, and that hopefully will give you comfort that ICFP is being used and used effectively. Of course, it's possible your school could be using elements of it, but there may be more potential for its use. If it isn't, or you think it isn't, then the one you probably want to know, then you'll probably want to know, check the position and find out how your school or trust is operating. And if the answer is that it isn't, then you may want to ask why this is and what it's doing instead. There are lots of ways of making ICFP happen in a school. There's lots of DFE guidance. There are free ICFP tools. So, but I think what people do need to be aware of is that if you're going to use it properly, the training will be needed and it will take time to implement. So the sooner that you start with it, I would say the better. And it's a question about deciding what tool to use. Okay, last, I'm just running over a little bit. So let me just do a poll. Andy, you still there?
I am. Here it goes.
Okay. Can you launch the poll, please? Let's just have a final poll here to see what people think about how useful ICFP might be for their school or trust. Okay. Okay, we're just closing the poll now. Andy, please. Thank you. I can see from the poll that I think 3% said not useful, 36% said useful, 27% said very useful, 32% said essential, and 3% none of the above. I'm not quite sure what that would have been. So I think I get take from that actually that most people, the vast majority, think that actually ICFP really does have a place in their school or trust, which is not surprising. But thank you for that. Can I just say, if you are already using ICFP in your school or trust, by all means send us some information about it. We'd love to find out more about how it's being used. You can put information in the chat. That would be very, very helpful. Thank you. Last but not least, I said at the beginning that the webinar was meant to be an introduction to ICFP, but here are a couple of early Christmas presents. Well, you've already had one, which is the new guidance paper. That came out at the end of November, so that one's, you've already had that one. But coming out, I think, as I say, I think it's tomorrow. There is a new Learning Link module, which includes a walkthrough of the 6-stage process for a school that uses ICFP. It's also got links to useful resources and advice to how to get ICFP going in your school if that's what you want to do, I think would be useful. So I hope you enjoy both of those. And finally, we've run over a little bit, apologies for that. Can I just say thank you very much for joining. It is very close to Christmas. I know nativity plays aren't on and other things, but thank you very much for joining. And thank you for completing the polls and sending in all the questions. I can see there's quite a lot of there to answer. I hope you found this a useful introduction and taster. And it'll help you and your board and school or trust decide what you want to do, or if you're going to use ICFP. So I suppose I should bring the webinar to an end now and just wish you all a very happy Christmas and a great 2021. Let's hope next year's less of a challenge than 2020 has been, and allows us to get on with making our schools as good as they can be. So goodbye and have a great break. Thank you.